Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. I am here today to wrap up all the books I have read in the month of March. Now, as you could have seen from my stats, I definitely didn't get around to all the books I wished, and a couple of them were very disappointing. So I'm going to show you first of all the books I will put back on my shelves. In this case, that was a bit of like an odd one, so those books actually stays in the bedroom, the main bedroom. But don't worry, eventually I will get to them. I didn't have the time this month to get around to reading them. So let's start with those, and then we're gonna go through my least enjoyable read to my most enjoyable read of the month. Okay, so these are the books that I've not even started. I'm gonna go back to my shelf. First of all, I've got the stunning edition from Fairy Loot of The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi. Again, those are books that I'm gonna keep and I'm gonna eventually read, but I didn't have time now. So these, unfortunately, this Fairy Loot I didn't catch up this month. I couldn't read or start The Queen of the Night, which again, all of these reads I was very much looking forward to, but I just couldn't fit them in, and that's okay. Couldn't get around to read Between Shades of Grey, unfortunately, and I couldn't get around to read Turtle All the Way Down, and very disappointing because I was looking forward to that. I couldn't read Look Who's Back, which is basically a story of Hitler coming back to life in modern world with social media and stuff like that. Probably the most disappointing one that I couldn't get around to was The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. I do want to finish this trilogy, but it didn't happen this month. Didn't have any DNFs this month, which is good, but I must say I didn't have a great reading month overall. I really enjoyed my number one pick, but all the rest were either or meh, unfortunately. So wasn't the best March, to be honest. And at number 11, I've got The Yellow Wallpaper. Now, this is a very short story. It's 63 pages long. I listened to this on audio. It was literally 34, I believe, minutes, and I was doing house chores, so I decided just to put that on because I'd heard so many people praising these. Basically the story of this woman who is initially depressed, and she's advised by her husband to stay inside the house, and especially in this room that has this yellow wallpaper, and eventually you follow her descent into psychosis. And I understand that this must be read after you kind of read the context in which the author wrote this. I understand that, and I think definitely if you don't do a bit of research on why this is important read, then you will miss out. Said that, I am gonna be a bit of a bitch, if you want, and admit that I found this unimpressive. Although I had read the context, I still felt this was meh. I have read other stuff by people with depression and going through similar things that wouldn't even compare in terms of quality. Definitely the fact that this is a short story has an impact in that, and so I failed, despite knowing the context, to truly appreciate these. This is a very personal opinion though, you might want to make up your mind, but yeah, this is just me being on it. And I know that this was unremarkable for me because when I wrote down on my diary what I wanted to say about this book or my thoughts and opinions about this book, I struggled to come up with a couple of sentences, which is never a good sign. Number 10, I've got Nettle and Bone. This is a fantasy. I think it's both adult and YA at the same time. There is definitely no adult content that someone on the younger side couldn't read, and it's the story of this 30-year-old princess that has been raised by nuns because her older sister has married the prince of another kingdom, and he is now being very abusive toward her sister, though is a very horrible prince. And so our main protagonist, living with nuns, decide to leave the monastery and go on a journey with a bunch of people in order to save the life of her sister, and then you kind of go from there. I listened to this on audio, and I had tried other Fisher audiobooks before, and I appreciated them, so I decided to listen to this as well. It had good reviews. Let's establish that the writing was good. I think she is a very good writer in general. However, having read Sword Heart just last month, I couldn't help but compare the two, and realizing that in this kind of format, at least when she writes like kind of fantasy, romance fantasy, they are pretty much carbon copies of each other. You might change the cast of characters, but you always have a 30-year-old main protagonist that she doesn't fit into beauty standards, that has to go on a journey with a bunch of peculiar characters, some of them very funny, and then you have a male interest. Protagonist usually is someone who rescues or is being rescued by our main protagonist and then vouches to protect her and go on a journey with her. And Sword Heart though was way more funny than Nettle and Bone. This didn't have any or very little amount of humor, which for me saved Sword Heart. Even the quest part, I don't know, because I've read again another book by her very similar, I kind of found a lot of elements in common that just made me not love this one so much. There wasn't nothing inherently wrong with it, but I think I do need a break of her kind of fantasy stories because they feel a bit repetitive. Also, I had high expectations of one of the companion in this quest that our main protagonist goes on. It's a hen that is possessed by a demon, and I was expecting at least to have a lot of humoristic elements, a lot of sassy banter, a lot of sassy dialogues and so on. Instead, I think the chicken, first of all, didn't come into play until like kind of halfway through the book, but also it was not utilized much. Like there was just very few scenes with the demonic chicken hen that I found a bit disappointed. I was expecting like the demonic chicken to be like playing a major part and provide a kind of humoristic element to the plot, and it didn't. So yeah, go with Sword Heart if you want to try one of her books, and I think I need a break from the author. At number 9 we have You Exist Too Much. This is a book club pick. So there is a beep outside, very annoying, but hopefully it's gone. So this is a book club pick for the month. So my book club chose these and we read these for end of March. And this is the story of this woman trying to navigate her love life as a bisexual woman and at the same time reconcile this with her religion. She is, I believe, from Syria, and her difficult relationship with her mother. Now, this is definitely not my genre, and if it wasn't for my book club, I'll be really honest, I wouldn't have picked this up. And the positive side, because this was so far from what I usually read, it kind of captivated me because it was somehow a new experience of reading, digesting a new type of story. I was of a belief that this was mostly autobiographical, but there is no, it's not said, although our main protagonist is never named, but I named her the bitch, and I'll get into that in a second. Her writing is also very, very good. I think I devoured this book in probably like 4 hours. I read it all, and it wasn't difficult for me to go through this book because of her writing, so digestible and so good. At the end of the day, it was a very, very good writing. Said that, the plot in itself, if you can even call it plot, it was definitely not my cup of tea. And also a lot of this content revolves around the main protagonist's love addiction and constant cheating of her partners, which for me, it was just it's a thing I hate. It's just not something I like to read about. It's something that I stand very much against too. So the fact that she kept repeating the same mistakes over and over again kind of made, you know, the whole purpose of this a bit void, because we are reading about a person doing the same things over and over again and not learning from her mistakes. She also came around a bit of like a brat, spoiled, to be fair, someone who had a very coddled life, and all she could focus on was, you know, one time but her mother didn't tell her she was pretty enough. So the motivations felt a bit superficial. Said that, unfortunately, they were also a bit realistic. I do honestly believe, and I've met people in my life, that their whole the whole psyche, the whole mental health evolves around, you know, it's very self-centered, and it's, you know, it might be sparked by a simple sentence by a parent or someone else who, you know, for some other people you would think, oh, it's not that deep, but for some people it is. So it felt a bit like vain in a sense, that she kept seeking partners and cheating on partners in order to be accepted and loved and told she was pretty enough. It was definitely not my genre, but again, I can't deny the skillful writing. Some parts of it I found touching about the human condition in general, how it is being a woman and navigating different cultures. That was very good, but overall 3 stars. I will get rid of this, I don't need to read it again. Okay, and number 8 I've got What Moves the Dead. This is a horror by Fisher again, so I've read twice 2 of her books, but this time this was a horror and I had never tried one of her horrors before, and this is a retelling of the fall of the Usher by Poe, which I had read the original one ages ago, I believe. My book collection is kind of behind me. That novel was contained in my collection, which I read all of it. Apart from his poetry, wasn't the biggest fan of his poetry, so I did give up on Poe's poetry at one point, but I've read all his novels, short novels, however you want to call it. And so I, though, had forgotten most of the content of a novel, so it felt quite fresh going to this one. I really liked the atmosphere. Her writing is good, so overall I do think like she's a writer that I do want to check out again in the future, in a while, as I mentioned before, but I do like her style. And I did like the environment she created, how sinister it was. I liked the characters enough. It was quite short, so again, as the actual novel is. But yeah, in a sense, I would have probably appreciated this as a more of a lengthy novel, more packed with mystery, horror elements, and while because again it's very short, there is not much content that you can put inside. I did though listen to this on audiobook, and I found myself getting quite distracted throughout, which can be also my fault in a sense, because I might have been like listening to this not at the right time, so while I was too busy doing something else, but at the same time a bit of the writing of the story kind of didn't pull me back in, so that's why it is at this place. So I think it sits in the right place, although the premise and the story itself I did enjoy. The only thing I have a grievance with is the author, because she actually spoiled for me Mexican Gothic. At the end of the audiobook there was an afterword by the author, and she kind of, I'm not gonna do this to you guys, but so be aware if you listen to these by any chance or read the book, that you don't want to read the afterword if you have not read Mexican Gothic yet, because I think she gives away a major part of the plot, which I don't know, because I've not read the book yet, but I was very excited about reading the book. The day that she might have spoiled it for me without no reason to do so, to be fair, pisses me off a bit. So just be warned, don't read the afterword of these if you have not read Mexican Gothic and you don't want to be spoiled. I am pretty sure she spoiled it because of what she says in the afterword. I'll get back to you on that once I've read Mexican Gothic. At number 7, I've got Fear Nothing by Dean Koontz. This is part of a duology by the author who wrote my favorite book of 2022. So needless to say, I had high expectations for this. In a nutshell, this is about this man, young man. He has illness for which he can't be exposed to any sunlight, otherwise he will get cancer, like way faster than any human. Even if it's got sunscreen on and everything, his skin is basically unable to stand any sunlight. So he lives pretty much during the night. His father passes away, and when he's there just to say the goodbye to the father and then eventually taking some stuff from the morgue or the crematorium, he sees his father's body being kidnapped, taken out of a crematorium, you know, loaded in a van. And after that things get crazy. It is a thriller action, sci-fi, don't know. Now plot wise this would be a 2 stars. Like really? No, like plot wise no. I honestly think this was written decades ago, that if the author could sit down now after he has become such a famous author and written probably so many better books than these, and if you were to unpack the plot with him and the motivations of the bad guys, which make no sense whatsoever, he would probably himself admit that, well, that was shit. I'm sorry, I'm a big fan of Koontz, but the plot was shit. Said that, is his writing that as always does it. He's such a good writer. Like his writing is so poetic, atmospheric, it's so reminiscent of literature that would, you know, be up to high standards in terms of quality, that I am amazed how he could take like a shitty plot like this and yet because of his writing makes this, you know, pump it up like almost 2 stars. Not to a 4 because that would be too generous, but probably 3.5 stars. It's like if, you know, the script for a movie, a Die Hard movie, was written by Shakespeare. The Die Hard movie is the same, the dialogue has been done by Shakespeare. Do you know what I mean? This is how I feel. You wanna try Dean Koontz? There are so many millions better choices out there, although I've read so little by him. I can't imagine this one being one of the best. At number 6, I've got If Cats Disappeared from the World, with another literature fiction, magic realism. I don't know how you would categorize these. I would go with literature fiction, and it's the story of this man who's given a death sentence due to cancer, I believe. And he goes home after receiving this news, and the devil appears and tells him, if you decide to make something disappear from the world, I'm gonna give you one more day. And the way this works is that every day he can choose to make something new disappear, and he will gain that day. So he can potentially live a full lengthy life as long as every day he cancels something from the world. This was a very quick, short, sweet novel, and it really made me think at times about what is essential in life. At the same time, I was expecting more. I don't know if it's writing in itself, again, is very good, but not as poetic, atmospheric as I was hoping for. Even the quotes, I did have a couple of quotes that I absolutely loved, but I was expecting these to be packed with it, kind of like a Zafon book, and it wasn't. But also about what is essential. I think at one point we're going down a tangent that kind of took me out of the story a bit. I think some of the things that are discussed in these, I personally found quite superficial when it comes down to potentially dying the next day, if it makes sense. So, but that's just a very personal preference though, because what we find essential in life, what we value in life, will depend on a million factors in our lives. So take this with a pinch of salt. The last thing is probably, I think I read this at a point in my life where I can appreciate it, but maybe not as much as I might appreciate these at other points in life. So I will potentially think about rereading these when I think it's the right time. But overall, I did have a good time. It was like a couple of hours read, 3 hours read max, and yeah, I'm actually glad I got around to finally read this because the premise was so fascinating. At number 5, I have got City of Nightmares. This is the Fairy Loot YA book for February. Because it's a Fairy Loot, I didn't speak about the plot, I believe, in my TBR, because usually my Fairy Loot don't arrive in time for me to film the TBR. The premise of this is actually quite cool. In this world, if you have a nightmare, then the next morning you woke up and you are your nightmare. So I don't know, if you have a nightmare where you are a giant spider, like the sister of our main protagonist at the beginning of the story, she woke up the next day transformed into a giant spider who ate their father and a bunch of other people. And then as a result of that, she is terrified of sleeping, she's terrified of, you know, transforming herself in a nightmare. And there are some pills and stuff that people can take in order not to, you know, become their nightmares, but there are a lot of kavod to that, and so the risk is very high. And when you start the novel, our main protagonist now, she's been orphaned through, you know, what the sister did. So she lives in a kind of cult where she performs some jobs and she can get a room in exchange. And she suffers a lot from anxiety though, due to the trauma that she has experienced when her sister transformed. I loved the premise of this, and the first 100 pages I thought this is gonna be a 5 stars. It felt very much like reading a story would take place in Gotham, in a sense. Gotham, the TV show, I mean. That's the atmosphere I kept thinking about in my mind while reading this. However, halfway through I started feeling very lukewarm towards all of it, because the YA element came into place, and I think again it had that convenience of the way the plot developed. That's typical YA that I really don't like. Some of the stuff that happen in here, and the reason why those things happen, are nonsensical. Like, come on, come up with some better plot devices to move forward your plot. It kind of bugs me sometimes that some author believes that what they do in their plot and the motivations of the bad guys in it are sensible or make sense. Like, is it just me, or like is there something you notice as well, that sometimes, you know, the reasoning behind the motivation of someone who's bad is just complete bullshit. What I did like, I think there is like a very well done, especially at the beginning, representation of anxiety and what anxiety might look like. I think her reaction to the trauma she had, so the anxiety that she experiences outside in the world, and how she behaves toward, you know, the environment outside, how she doesn't want to do certain things, how she might become overwhelmed doing certain things due to her anxiety. That was quite well represented in my opinion. But there's a series, there are sequels. I guess I don't know how many there will be. I'm not sure what we'll do with them. I probably will wait for reviews. Maybe I'll check out the audiobook instead and then decide. Jury's still out on this one. At number 4, I have got Eeny Meeny. Now, this is the start of a detective series. In each book, you follow a new case, and in this one in particular, you follow these serial killers who kidnaps not couple like they don't have to be like couple that are in love or like husband or wife or whatever is the case. They can be just friends, they can be people that work together, just they always get kidnapped in a pair. And then one has to kill the other in order to escape and be released. And then you follow the detective try to resolve this case. Now, I think the author has had something with these in terms of characters and parts of the plot. It's a very violent, the scenes are explicit, so be aware of that. Definitely not for kids or even, you know, people that might be sensible to violence. However, what I didn't love about this is the writing style. It felt like reading, I don't know, I would describe this as a military writing, which is nonsensical, doesn't mean anything. Each sentence felt like, yes sir, I'll keep reading, yes, and this happened, and then he left, and then he moved, and then he went there, and then he jumps from, you know, scenes to scene without much context or anything. Now, I've mentioned before how I prefer plot over characters overall, but in reality, I like balance. Think if you have a perfect balance of characterization and plot, that's when you got the perfect match. If I had to choose one, I would choose the plot. And in here, I would have liked to be able to breathe sometimes while reading these. And instead it was action after action after action, which was a novelty to me. Like, I've never read something so bare. That's another way I could describe it. The sentences that made up this book were bare, but the concept was cool, and I do believe that there is potential for this author, so I might check out in charity shops or audiobooks, probably charity shops, so I like to read these physically for the sequels. I honestly don't know if I would suggest these. Doubtlessly there are way better crime thrillers out there. However, I can't deny that there was something that captured my attention in these, and there are definitely good elements of the plot. At number 3, I've got a reread, and the read is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I have not read this whole series since I was a child, so this is my first actually reread of the Harry Potter series, and of course I decided to go with the illustrated editions. I'm gonna just show you one illustration because I think I don't want to spoil anything. It's really worth the money if you're into Harry Potter. The illustrations were just stunning, and even if when you don't have full pages illustrations, you still get like pages that are colored like these. You still get pages with like stuff on it, so every page was like, let me turn it and see what's on it, and most of the times I was very well pleased. Now, I'd been decades since I read Harry Potter series, so I felt a lot of elements of the plot felt pretty new, like I was reading it for the first time. Let me say this because I started reading these when the first illustrated edition came out, and the more I go on with the series, the more it appears clear that Harry Potter is a douchebag. Like, he is a self-centered, narcissistic asshole. I can't stand Harry Potter. He's very nasty with people around him. He's nasty with his friends, especially in this one. It's all focused on himself. And so I don't understand how he became the hero, because for me, the heroes in these are Fred and George. I like Hermione and Ron a lot, but Fred and George forever. What they do toward the end, their exit from this book was brilliant. I didn't remember that scene and I loved it. It's the reason why this book is so high up in the list, is because Fred and George. And everybody around Harry Potter is trying to, you know, make him see sense, and he doesn't listen to anybody. He's just horrible, that guy. The chosen asshole, as I like to call him. I believe that this was my favorite one in the series. Somehow I remember that of all the 7 books, this one was my favorite one. But I realized that the plot in this one is very slow and not much happens at all, although we have semi-important revelations toward the end. So I would definitely not say now that Order of the Phoenix is my favorite one. For many, I think it's the weakest, and I probably agree with that now. But we will see. I will continue the read. Unfortunately, I think Jim Kay is not going to illustrate anymore, but there are new pages with art by another author, which is Neil Packer, and he was very good. I really love his art, so I'm sure I will enjoy the next one in the series. At number 2, I have World of Radiance Part 1. Now, in UK, I don't know why, they decided to divide the book in 2 parts. This is an epic high fantasy by Brandon Sanderson. We all know what this is because it's such a popular high fantasy. It's a staple of the genre right now, has become, in recent years, so popular and so well beloved. I've just read the first part this month, so I'm not judging the whole World of Radiance as a second book because I can't at the moment, because I've not read the second part. And I will try to read it by the end of summer, definitely. I don't want to, you know, make too much time pass. Let me say this is meant to be read as a whole book. This very much felt like a setup for events that have yet to come. So I'm expecting great things from the second part of this book. This book, though, was a bit slow. It's definitely not my favorite thing ever, and the only reason why it's so high up in the list is because all the rest of the reads of this month were somehow pretty lukewarm again. Didn't have the best reading month. So this was still around 3.75, 4, but if I'm very generous, but I would still stick with the 3.75, I'll be really honest. And it would have been way worse if it wasn't for Shellan. I love her character. I found her part of the plot the only one that really carried on this first part at least. And I do like all the characters. I like Adeline, I like all of them, but they didn't do much in this apart from Shellan, so that's why I said she carried this novel forward. But take my judgment with a pinch of salt, because I do believe that this must be read, it's meant to be a whole book, part 1 and part 2, so I don't want to go into much details now because I don't think it's a fair chance. So the only thing I'm gonna add to this before I actually do a proper review once I've read both parts is that I do notice something. I like Sanderson's plot. I think he has good characters, and I think he does have good ideas for his plot, and his magic systems, although I'm not always so sold about them, I think he creates so many layers, so many things to be explored and discovered. The way he creates myths and legends and brings them to life in his novels is something I really love about his novels, but I don't love his writing. I think compared to other fantasy writers that wrote some of my best fantasy books ever, his writing doesn't stand out for me. You can tell this for how little, for example, I feel like I need to tab his books or his sentences. This is just my opinion, and I think this is something that I've kept noticing, and I think that's the reason why, although I do like Sanderson's books and I will read them, all of them, I don't know. I'm not obsessed with him. I wouldn't, you know, pay a lot of money for a special edition or anything at the moment, at least. I've not read more than this in this series, which has a lot of potential in my opinion. He's still not one of my favorite writers. I really like his books, but I don't pull my hair out for him as I would for George R.R. Martin. It's just a different, they're just on a different level, in my opinion. I think if I had to pinpoint why Sanderson is not on the same plane of George R.R. Martin is because of their writing styles and how different they are. I personally prefer George R.R. Martin's style of writing rather than Sanderson. And at number 1, I have somehow, it was unexpected because I liked it more than I initially thought, and yeah, it was actually a very pleasant read. It's one read from the month that someone asks me, oh, what you've read recently, I would probably suggest this book to them. This is Monday's Not Coming. It's a dark contemporary by Jackson. I had already read another book by her, which I didn't mind, but I thought toward the end it kind of messed up a bit in my opinion, while these, a bit the opposite happened, in the sense that until like the last quarter I really enjoyed it, but I didn't love it, and then the last quarter happened and I was just like, okay, this is so bloody good. This is the story of Claudia. Claudia she's kind of isolated from her peers apart from Monday. Monday is her best friend. They do everything together, they have plans to go to the same school, secondary school together, they dance together, they are very best friends. And one day though, Claudia goes to school and Monday is not there, and from then on Claudia tries to find Monday everywhere because she has disappeared. So I had a couple of theories. One I thought was gonna be like, it was probably a good theory, and I was so wrong about what this was. I was in awe of how well this was crafted. When we found out what happens to Monday, I was so caught off guard. And I went just like from this is good to, oh, this is good. This is very good. I also need to kind of praise a lot the audiobook narrator. I listened to this on audiobook, and the narrator does an amazing job with their voices, their pace in talking through the story was amazing. I really had the best times. In terms of contemporaries, this is definitely one that, because it's YA, and again, as you might have guessed by now, I'm not the biggest fan of YA lately, but this really stood out to me. It's a YA that I would definitely recommend to adults and young teens. I think it also tackles a lot of issues that are less seen in contemporary stories, a lot of themes that in this way are not so commonly done, in my opinion. So I really appreciated what she does with this novel. I was devastated. I cried at one point. I was an emotional mess, and I think I will definitely check out the author. I think there is Thicker Than Blood or something like that. There is a Carrie retelling that I want to check out by her pretty soon. But big fan of the author in general, and this does definitely come out as one of the best contemporaries I've read, especially YA, in a very, very long time. Only one critique at the end, when we get the reasoning behind why these things happen. I think the motivation was a bit lacking. I would have liked to have it more explored. I think in real life, cases like these unfortunately do exist, and we would have had a bit of more introspection on why it was done. I don't know, I felt that was a bit brushed over, but overall this is a truly something that I would highly recommend. I was afraid that, you know, although the writing was good and everything, by the end it wouldn't justify the bit of slow pace at times, but the wait was worth it. Thank you guys for watching. I think I've talked enough. Let me know what was your favorite read in terms of books of the month. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe and join me for a conversation in the comments down below. I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself. Ciao!